Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to the Nautel webinar on what to do when your STL feed goes down. I'm Chuck Kelly, your host for this event, Regional Sales Manager for Asia Pacific for Nautel, and I'm joined by a rock star panel of experts that are here to help clarify all the options that you've got, including Scott Macleod from our customer service team. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Chuck. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. Josh Bohn from Bohn Broadcast Services. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Chuck.
And not least, Matt Walther, Product Manager from ENCO. Welcome,
Hello there.
Matt.
Thank you for having us.
Glad you're here. So the first question is, why do I need a backup? Well, I think the assembled knowledge base of all these folks would agree in our years of experience that, solid state FM transmitters or AM transmitters are very reliable. And studio equipment these days with multiple studios and all that, very reliable. But the bit that tends to go bad is the part in between, the STL. And that tends to fail more often than not. So we've put a lot of thought and effort in our designs, in our systems, to backup. And we'll start with having Scott explain what we can do just built right into your transmitter. But first, I want to mention that you have the opportunity to ask questions. In the GoToWebinar panel that you've got on your screen there, there's a questions button, and you can click on that and ask a question. And at the end of the webinar, all the accumulated questions that are there we'll answer to the best of our knowledge. If we can't get to everybody's questions, then we'll get back to you by email. Do remember that the completion of one of these webinars qualifies for half of an SBE recertification credit identified under Category 1 of the recertification schedule for SBE certifications. So, Scott, tell us what's built in already into our Nautel transmitters.
Okay, to start with, we're just looking at a table here that lists the different types of transmitters from the FM, NV, NV Lite, VS, and GV series, and the AM low power NX series. And just some of the different audio stuff they have based on their software versions. So the minimum software version is what's in the table. And on the left column, we have the audio options. So for example, USB audio playout is the ability for the transmitter to play audio from a USB playlist, which is generally your last resort audio. It's fixed audio files on a USB. And this is supported in the NX, NV Lite, VS, and GV series. Also, Shoutcast, Icecast streaming audio is supported on the same series of transmitters. Just be aware that the minimum software requirements must be met. If you're running at older software, you would have to update your software to be able to run Shoutcast and Icecast.
Which, truth be told, should probably be done anyway.
Yes, and the versions that we're looking at here are
really
all
old.
Fairly old. Yes, the 5.2 VS that we see later is the newest software, but other than that, these are all pretty old softwares. The OR band inside is a great feature. It allows you to add the OR band processor in the transmitter, which saves you the expense of an external processor. And it is available in the NV Lite, VS, and GV series that meet those software requirements. MPX over AES, which is a relatively new audio format, is supported in the FM series transmitters. Be aware if you have an older NV Lite or VS transmitter, the software update itself might not be enough to allow you to run MPX over AES. So if you have a transmitter of these vintages, the NV Lite or VS, and you're interested in running MPX over AES, you should contact support@nautel.com, and we'll tell you if it's available in your transmitter. What we'll be concentrating on today, I think, is the audio switchback and the mod loss preset switching features that are available in the transmitters. So, and we'll talk a bit more about the audio switchback and mod loss preset, which are available in the FM transmitters, and the mod loss is also available in the NX, the AM transmitter. So the biggest differences are, so there's these two ways that we can switch audio if something happens. One is referred to as the audio backup, which is an audio switch back. So in this configuration, you have a main and a backup audio source, both of which are being monitored. And if the main audio is present, you're running on your main audio. If it fails, you will switch to the backup audio. If the main comes back, you'll switch back to the main. Mod loss is slightly different. It's not looking at two audio sources. It's looking at the total modulation. And if your modulation drops below a certain threshold that you select, then the transmitter, you can enable a change preset, and in that new preset, you can configure a different audio. And we'll go through some examples of that later on in the presentation. All right, Chuck, I think we can, yeah. So the audio, the backup audio or the audio switchback, we see the VS series screenshot here where we set it up. So we enable this in a preset, and basically it allows us to look at a main and a backup audio source. And we will be running from the main audio source as long as it is present. If it goes away, we'll switch to the backup. And if the main comes back, within a second, we'll switch back to the main. Now, there are, to configure this, the main audio when it switches to the backup, we set the limits, we the user, and we set a time and a threshold. In this example, we have the threshold set at minus 22 dB. So if your main audio drops by a level of minus 22 dB, for a time of 20 seconds, we will switch to the backup audio.
And you can configure those to anything you want, not just at 20 seconds.
That is correct. 20 seconds is way too long. In the example that I'll show, the live example that I'll show after this, I have my set to 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some limitations when we're talking about the auto switchback of the audio. For the GV and the VS-HD transmitters, if you're using an Orban card, then only one AES source can be used. So, for example, you can't use an AES input as the main and streaming audio as a backup, because they're both AES in the transmitter. If you're using MPX over AES as either the primary backup, the other source cannot be AES. You could use analog or MPX. If you have any MPX SCAs operating on your transmitter, then you cannot use MPX as either the main or backup source. Okay. Now, the NV-Lite VS has a couple of other limitations. No matter what, you can only run one AES as either the primary or backup. So you can never have AES as main and a playlist as backup, only because the hardware itself is only monitoring one of those levels. And if you're using MPX over AES, then you must be using MPX or composite as your backup audio. Now, mod loss is the other option. So this isn't the audio switchback. This is we're not looking at audio levels for mod loss. We're actually looking at the total modulation depth. So when we set this in the preset, which is in the other settings tab, we set a low modulation depth and a time. So in this example, the threshold is set at 25% modulation. So if the modulation drops below 25%, for a time of 5 seconds, we will change preset to preset 2. And then preset 2 we can configure for a different audio source. The thing to remember about when we're configuring mod loss is we're talking about total modulation. So keep in mind, if you're running RDSs, if you're running stereo, you have pilot modulation. So even if you lose your audio content, you will still have, 9% modulation depth from your pilot, and possibly 4 or 5% from your RDS, and then if you're using SCAs, more. So make sure you properly set the threshold above the modulation level that you will get if you totally removed audio. Now, we can use the audio backup auto switchback and the mod loss together to allow us to use multiple audios as backups. So in the example on this slide, we have our main audio source, which is AES. So that's what we want to be broadcasting. We'll start by operating on preset 1. If AES fails, we will automatically switch to MPX. If the AES comes back, we will switch back to AES. If both the AES fails and the MPX fails, the mod loss setting in preset 1 will automatically switch to preset 2. And once we switch to preset 2, we have, once again, the main audio is set to AES. And if it is gone, then we'll be running on analog. If the AES comes back, once again, we'll switch back to AES as our main audio source. But if for some reason the AES is still gone and we lose analog, then we will switch to preset 3, which has the main audio selected as AES, and our backup is a secondary digital playlist stream, like a USB playlist. So in this case, we'd start playing our playlist, and if AES came back, we would come back to the main AES. And then we could have this set up so that if we lost the stream as well, we'd switch back to preset 1 and carry on. So in this case, we're using 4 different audio sources, but maintaining the AES as the main audio source.
And if you have all 4 of those sources fail, you're having a bad day.
That's a bad week. That's a bad week.
Okay, let's one of the nice things about live broadcasting is we can try to do things on the fly. So I'm going to change things around, Scott, and make you the presenter. And that's going to make it so that we can see your screen, and you're going to go live to a VS closely located with you and demonstrate some of this so everybody can see it firsthand. We see your screen.
You see my screen?
Do indeed.
Okay, great. So what we're looking at here is a VS300 with the 5.2 software. I have an MPX audio source. I have a digital AES audio source. I have an analog audio source connected, and I've got a USB stick where I've created a playlist. And what we're going to do is I'll show you how I have the presets set up and how the audio switchback works, and then how the mod loss works. So current preset is MPX 98.1 megahertz. We can tell from the list plot that we are running composite or MPX input. It always shows as a circle for composite input. When I look at the preset configuration, I can see the main audio source is MPX and my backup is AES. So the first thing we'll do is see what happens when we lose MPX. And before I do that, I'll just show you the user settings that we're using for the playback. So audio low thresholds. So if my main audio drops by minus 20 dB for 5 seconds, we should switch to the backup audio. All right, so let's try it. We'll drop the MPX level. You can see that the modulation went down. Now the status went yellow, so we have some sort of fault, and we are no longer on composite. We've got some sort of audio, either analog or AES. And we have modulation back. So we have successfully switched to our backup source. We get the alarm showing MPX audio is low, and we're on audio backup. Also in the features of the VS and NV Lite and GV transmitters, we can actually configure an automated email if we wanted to send an email notification out to us to say, hey, we have switched to the backup audio, and that way we know that we have a problem with our main audio source. If the composite comes back, you can see the MPX level has come back, and we have immediately switched back to the composite input. So this is how the audio switchback works. We're always trying to run from the main, but if we lose it, we will switch to the backup. Now, in this preset, I've also set up a mod loss timeout. So it's enabled, and if my modulation drops, so if my modulation, which is shown here, drops below 20% for more than 10 seconds, I will switch to a preset that's called analog 98.1 megahertz. So let's try activating that. So the first thing we're going to do is lose our MPX. So now we've switched over to our backup source, which is the AES. So now I will simulate a loss of AES. And what should happen is, so now we're off air. We have 9% modulation shown just from the pilot. What should happen is we should change over, and we can see we just changed over. Now the active preset is analog 98.1 megahertz. So this is the mod loss timeout feature that was activated. So now we're on this preset. Now for this preset, the audio source is actually an analog source, analog left and right. And once again, this preset has a backup, which is my audio player, which is a playlist I created from a USB drive, just to show you the playlist. So the playlist I have is playlist songs, and you can always tell what song you're playing on the playlist by the music signal. Now this isn't actually on air yet. It's the backup audio that's being ready to be switched in if we have a problem with our main. So
Something
now
tells me we're about ready to have a problem with our main.
Yeah, so now the third audio source, which is now our analog, is going to stop. So you can see the analog is, our modulation is dropped down. And we are still on the analog 98 megahertz, 98.1 megahertz. We are back on air, and in our status, we can see our analog left audio low and analog right audio low, and we are successfully once again on our backup audio.
And Iron Maiden is on the air.
That's right. That is right. So these, in this example that I showed, we went through 3 audio sources that have failed, and now we are on our 4th. But there are certainly a lot of possibilities with setting up using the mod loss and the audio playback switchback to make sure you stay on air.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll go back to this presentation, and hopefully you're going to see the right thing here. Now, one of the things that's interesting is we really didn't have probably one of the most beneficial, one of the most effective and easiest form of backup. We didn't show that, and that is using Shoutcast or Icecast, because a lot of people are already streaming on Shoutcast or Icecast, and if you've got a compatible screen, you can plug in the IP address for your stream, and in case of a failure of your STL, the transmitter can be programmed to automatically go to that stream and pick up that stream and put it on the air. Now, if you don't happen to have, you're not doing Shoutcast or Icecast streaming on your station, then setting all that up might be considered complicated and a challenge, but not for our next presenter, Mr. Josh Bohn.
Thanks, Chuck. As Chuck said, setting up a Shoutcast or an Icecast stream, it may seem daunting. It did to me at first. But after doing it a few times and working with some other clients that have done it, we've discovered it's a relatively easy and painless way to set it up. And the best way to do it so it's compatible with your transmitter is to visit the Icecast website at icecast.org and download Icecast for Windows. Then the encoder that we found works the best with this is SE Caster, which is short for Sound Empire Caster. Ignore the graphic. That was a different encoder that we tried that has some bugs. But SE Caster can be downloaded from the link on your screen. As I said, it's a relatively painless, quick and easy setup. And the cool thing about it is the encoder and the server can both be installed on the same PC. So you don't have to worry about setting up multiple PCs on your network and daisy chaining the audio together and things like that. So moving on, the configuration and installation of the Icecast server, like I said, visit icecast.org, download it and choose Icecast for Windows. And then when you download it, and you'll install the file. Once it's installed, you want to browse to your C drive into Program Files x86 and the Icecast folder. Then in that Icecast folder, there's an XML file called icecast.xml. You'll want to right-click on that and go to Edit, and then the file should open in Notepad or Notepad++ or WordPad or some basic text editor. That's all you want. When you scroll through the file, you want to find the authentication section, which is highlighted in the yellow box to the right on your screen. And in that section, you'll want to edit the usernames and passwords to something more secure than the default, which is hack me, because I think that could be figured out relatively easily. What I typically do is I'll typically leave the usernames the same and put in a very secure password between the internal carets that are pointing at the password. One tip at the bottom of your screen, use different passwords for your administrator, relay, and source password. This definitely reduces the risk of hacking. If somebody gets one of those passwords, that means that if they're the same, they can get in and manipulate your entire stream, whereas if they just figure out one and everything is different, then the chances of them being able to completely destroy your stream and possibly take over your broadcast are much lower. Then your next step is to click the Start button. You'll want to find the Icecast folder in your Start menu, and then there's a selection that says Run Icecast Console in parentheses. Once you select that, it will open this command window. It's actually a PowerShell window, and this is what shows that your Icecast server is running. This window has to stay open. If you close it, it actually closes and stops the server. You can minimize it to get it out of your way, but if you click the X, it will dump the server and your stream will stop. Then your next step would be to, once you have SECaster downloaded, it does download as a zip, so you'll have to extract it with Windows. You'll want to find that folder in your download folder, and then double-click on the secaster.exe. SECaster is not a program, or I'm sorry, it is not an installable program. It's just an executable, so you don't have to worry about it dumping a bunch of registry entries or anything like that. You can move that folder to pretty much wherever you want on your computer that's convenient, or if you just want to leave it where it's at, you can create a desktop shortcut to secaster.exe. That makes it easier to start anytime that you need it on demand. Then you'll want to set up and program the SECaster as your encoder. Once it's open, you can see the main screen there in the center. To set up the encoding parameters, you'll click on the red plus sign, and it'll bring up the little screen on the left. To set up your audio input parameters, you'll click on the black squigglies. I've never figured out what that is, but you click there, and that sets up your audio input, your language, and your sample rate. Once you're in those settings, the first thing that we typically do is the audio setup. So once you're in there, you can set up your language. The SECaster is nice because it's available, I think, in 7 different languages. So that keeps it easy for anyone, regardless of where they are in the world or what your native language is. The device would be whatever your audio input device is that you're going to want to encode. Open device, the by number device radio button is selected by default. Leave that alone. And then the default sample frequency is 44.1. We usually leave that alone as well. Then in your stream settings under the red plus sign, you'll need to specify your server address and your port number. If the server and the encoder are running on the same PC, then the server is your default local IP, which is 127.0.0.1. The default port for SECaster is 8000, and then the username that you'll specify are what you specified in that XML file. The mount point is critical for Icecast streams. Shoutcast streams don't have this, but Icecast requires a mount point. That is the unique identifier for each stream, as you can actually attach multiple encoders and decoders, such as transmitters, through the same IP address and port. The mount is what differentiates them so that the decoder and the encoder know what they're looking at. And that is typically formatted as a slash. And we use call signs typically to differentiate between different formats or different streams for different formats. You can make it whatever you want, but you have to have that slash in front of it. Then the type always has to be MP3 if you're wanting to use it with the Nautel internal audio player, or PCM if you're on an internal network. Bitrate is adjustable. So if you're using MP3, I would not use anything less than 192 for the bitrate. Otherwise, your audio quality starts to suffer. Obviously, if you're data capped and you need to use a lower bitrate, you are going to have better or lower audio quality, but at least you're on the air. And then channels should be set to stereo. Then once you're in, once you have that configured and you close out of your settings, this will bring you to the main page. You'll see the stream in the middle that you configured. It gives you your IP address, your port number, and then the mount point, all the other pertinent information. Then to begin encoding, you click on the play button to the right where near the yellow arrow. This stream in this picture has already been started, so that's why you see meters moving. Input levels are very critical on this encoder. The default input level for the streaming decoder in the transmitter is -4 dBFS. If you leave it at that, these meters match almost perfectly with the modulation meter on the transmitter. So you're going to want to keep it down in the green. Once you start getting up into the yellow, you're going to be modulating at 130, 140%. Then the next thing, if you're streaming over the internet, you have to open the appropriate port in your router. If you're using the default, it's 8000. And then the IP address that it's associated with would be the IP of the Icecast server machine. Every router is different. If you're unfamiliar with how to forward a port, you can always consult the manufacturer or ask your engineer or IT person. If you're streaming via a local network, IP radios, a VLAN, some other type of private network, you can disregard this unless you have an internal firewall that's segmenting different portions of your network. Then you would want to consult with your IT department for that. Next, moving on to the transmitter. This is extremely simple to configure. In the AUI, you click on Menu, then you go to the Audio Player. Once you're in the Audio Player screen, you'll click on the Streams tab, as you can see in the graphic on your screen. Then down at the bottom, you'll click the Add button. It pops up an Add Audio Stream box. In that, you'll choose Icecast, Shoutcast as the type. The friendly name is what you'll reference in the preset so that you know what you're listening to, as in Scott's playlist was 8 songs. You type in something so that you know what stream you're listening to. Then the URL for this is the full stream address. A typical Icecast stream address is below the graphic. It would be http://. You have to have the http://, otherwise it won't decode it. Then you have the full IP address, your port number / your mount point, or in this case, we have it designated as a call sign. Then the final step to this is in the presets menu, you want to select the preset that you want to create this as the audio source for. Then you load your preset, select the main audio tab, then choose audio backup and set that to enabled. Then you'll want to choose the audio source as audio player AES2, select the name that you created for the stream as the audio player source. You may have to adjust the digital level depending on how hard you're hitting the encoder, whether you have a preprocessor on it, whether you're using an Orban card, but that's typically all you have to do, and that will set up. You'll have the audio set up as your backup, and it will follow the audio failover that Scott had already talked about. Then Max Connect Wireless is a product that we offer from Bohn Broadcast Services. We have lots of customers that are actually using this as their IP delivery to their transmitter site. Some are using it for STL, some are just using it to access their AUIs and remote controls, but it is a prioritized commercial grade of service. It rides on the LTE network, so your speeds are quite good in most cases. Service is available on all 3 major carriers. You get a static IP address. There's no contract. There's no early termination fees. No proprietary hardware. We can get it from us or bring your own. We don't block any ports. We can open whatever ports you need. We're VPN capable, so if you have a corporate firewall or something that you have to run on a VPN, we have quite a few customers that are already doing that. And we can also provide many different types of external antennas to allow you to get connectivity even at some remote sites that are a pretty good ways away from the nearest cell tower. So this is an option to consider if you are looking for an audio delivery or just an IP solution at your transmitter site if you don't have any other options or your other options are unreliable.
Thank you, Josh. That's very interesting. You bring up a good point. Sometimes it isn't your Marty STL or whatever type you have that has failed. Sometimes it's your internet that has gone down, and this MaxConnect provides an alternative internet path that can be used. And in those situations, and Scott mentioned it, you could use the internal audio player. There's the capability within these transmitters to plug in a USB storage device, whether it's a USB dongle or a USB hard drive. You can have about 300 cuts on that USB storage. You can play MP3 or WAV files. Multiple playlists are supported. You can create a playlist and play it out. And cuts can even be uploaded through the AUI, and the playlist can be changed through the AUI. However, there are limitations. It's only 16-bit audio. Sample rates need to be equal to or less than 48 kilohertz. Bit rates of 384 kilobits per second or more are supported. There is no segue capability. This is an emergency backup type of system. So it just cuts one to the other, no segue. And if the power is interrupted some point in time and comes back on, the transmitter will come back on in the same mode that it was, but the playlist will start at the beginning, which may not be what you want to have happen. If you want a more, shall we say, functional backup for your transmitter site, there's the ENCO Enstreamer. Matt?
Thank you. Yeah, about 4 years ago, when we started working with Nautel, and ENCO and Nautel partnered together to kind of look for solutions for the issues that you were just talking about with the playlist manager, limited space for cuts, limited control abilities. So we started a couple of different projects, and we learned quite a bit from these projects when we were developing and working things together. There were some obstacles that really needed to be addressed, things like resources. So how do you store enough content to replicate your broadcast schedule, be it music or long form programming? Because you never know when you're going to have a failure, and it could happen at any time, day or night. So you need to be thinking about, what do we have in terms for content? How can we get it out? If your station is doing a lot of long form programming and you've got specific shows on at the specific times of day, you want to be able to think about that as well. That's what I talk about control. How do you make a switch to a backup system so it can be as seamless as it can be in terms of content, so it's not jarring for your listening audience? So that way, potentially even in the same song. Well, you can certainly do that with Icecast and the internet streams, and that's a very robust solution there. But if you lose that internet, then there's a chance that you might end up losing that content as well. And so that's what we came up with. The design ended up being a small form factor player that could mirror the ENCO DAD automation system that was being used at the studio. And that's what we called the Enstreamer. And so Enstreamer's a dedicated hardware solution that broadcasters can use. They can use it as a studio transmitter link. It can be used for other applications as well. The Enstreamer can decode your internet stream that we were talking about setting up. It can receive that and stream that right back out. And if that should fail, it will then play audio that it has stored on its own internal drive. You can download audio and other files, including playlists, and store them on this device, so that way they can be played automatically. With our system, it interfaces directly with your studio on-air automation system. And here's an example of a very simple look of what it might be. You can use this over a public internet. It's based upon the Raspberry Pi platform. So you can, again, set it to pull in your internet stream and mirror directly what's going on in the studio. And when I say mirror directly, if you make a change in the playlist and you save that playlist in your studio, that will trigger a system that will automatically download the playlist and download any new audio files that need to be done on the Enstreamer itself. So it makes a very nice, robust solution. And on the next slide, you're going to see a little bit about what this device can do. If you lose your STL, you can have the transmitter on an alarm condition take a preset, which the preset for the audio would be the audio coming out of the Enstreamer, and have that take over automatically. And to get around some of the limitations, this can do segs, this can do timed events. So if you need to have a show or a broadcast that starts at a specific time of day, you can set that up and have that ready to go. You end up having 64 gigs, plenty of space on a compact flash drive to be able to store all of the audio. There is support for USB-based audio devices. As you know, the Raspberry Pi has a mini plug, so there's a more elegant solution by using some of the USB-based audio devices that are available. Again, it can play out stored audio even if the internet is lost, which means that if something should fail in that, you're still going to have content on the air to play for so that way you're not totally dead air. And again, the cost of this is just under $1,000. And it makes a nice solution to mirror your on-air ENCO system and provide a solid solution with a couple of layers of redundancy.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I've had an opportunity to take a peek at our questions, and I'm afraid we've got dozens and dozens of questions, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through them all, but we'll try. One thing I do need to mention is that if you missed some information that was previously in the webinar, we're going to put both a PDF of all the presentations up on our website, and we're going to put a canned version, a recorded version of today's webinar in its entirety up on our website. Give us a few hours to get that done, but it will be up there. So you'll be able to see this today or tomorrow. If you want somebody else in your organization to see it, you can let them know and it'll be there and they can see this. So let's take our best shot at answering some of these questions. One gentleman, Mark, has said, how would one configure NV Lite to fail over to Shoutcast if the AES analog feed goes silent? Scott?
Okay, so for the NV Lite, you cannot have an AES main feed and then a stream as the backup.
In the automatic switchback mode.
Right, sorry.
You could do it if it was separate. You could do it if it was separate presets, right?
You are, yes, absolutely correct. So what you'd have to do is set the mod loss setting in the transmitter. So you would have one preset set to your AES main, and then in that preset, in other settings, you would enable mod loss timeout, and you would select a different preset that had the stream selected as the main audio source. Right. So and then you'd set if the modulation drops to a certain level for 5 or 10 seconds, you would switch to the stream preset, and then you would start streaming.
And the thing that would be important is to set up a notification, an automatic email notification that it did switch, so that you know to check whether or not the STL, the primary STL, is back. And if it is, log into the AUI and switch it back.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's see here. It says, any plans for a phone application that would allow us to pull up the AUI to switch sources, etc.? That's from John. Gee, I don't know whether that's part of the AUI companion that's currently in beta test. That's a good question. I'll have to find out, and I'll let you know by email, John. Thank you for that. Is the audio switchback feature going to be added to the NV transmitters? I don't think that's possible, is it?
I do not believe so, no.
There's, what we try to do is when we have new features roll out, we add them, and all these features came out after the NV came out. some of them, like MPX over AES, we were able to go back and add that feature to a transmitter that was by that point in time already obsolete. But sometimes because of the hardware in the older transmitter, it's not possible. So unfortunately, it is not always possible to do what we want to do. What's STLs are currently or soon handling MPX over AES? Good question, Rick. So there are STLs out there. I have heard that Mosley might have one. I'm certain that the microwave type of IP STLs, that's what it really was going to require, is you're going to have to take an AES and transport it over IP, and that would do the job. That's a very effective transmission medium, and particularly so if you're doing SFNs. MPX over AES is wonderful for SFNs. It's also wonderful because it gives you the opportunity to have your digital audio processor have a digital audio output and go straight into the exciter of the transmitter, which is digital, and you lose no audio quality. You go through no A to D or D to A, and you don't lose audio performance. So there you go. It says, I have 3 NV transmitters, Mike does. And is there any future to have audio backup feature? I don't need USB or streaming audio, but I would love the ability to fall from MPX to analog and back automatically. The back automatically part, as we've described, is the tough part. We can get it to switch over, but you can't get it to come back automatically, unfortunately, Mike. There are limitations in the hardware. Gentleman from Brazil, the audio player is in the NV5. What did it say on that chart there, Scott? Do you remember? In the NV5, the audio player is there or no? I don't think so.
I don't think so, no.
No, sorry. Again, we do our very best to make things move backwards, but when it requires new hardware, sometimes it's not possible. David asks, when it switches to analog audio left-right, does it generate stereo? Good question, and the answer is yes. We have a built-in stereo generator in this transmitter. So yes, in fact, it can. We can generate stereo whether or not we're coming in with AES EBU, or we're coming in with analog left and right, or with the internal Shoutcast, Icecast, and or audio player functions. The stereo coder is built in and can be configured to operate. Jason asks, can you set up to switch presets if an audio source in another preset becomes available? No. The answer is no, and the reason is because we can only look at a certain number of things at the same time, and if we've switched from one preset to the other, we can't monitor something that's in a different preset. You know what, folks? I'm about 1/10 the way through all the questions, and we've exhausted all of our time. So I'm afraid we're going to have to go back and answer all the rest of your very good questions, and thank you for asking them, but we'll answer them by email. For additional information, here's places to get information. My email address is here. You can get a contact with Nautel support, brochures, spec pages, tech manuals, and the Nautel webinars page where you signed up for this. That page is where this canned webinar will be when we're done. I'd like to thank each of you for being a part of this very interesting webinar. It's very obvious to me from the number of questions that we've hit a nerve. We've hit something that people want to know about, and I'm very grateful to those of you who are presenters here with us and sharing your knowledge and experience, and also for the large audience that we have. This is a record-breaking audience for us, and we're very grateful to have you with us here today. So, guys, thank you for being a part of the webinar.
Thanks, Chuck.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
We're glad you were part of it. So for all of our presenters and all of us at Nautel, I want to thank you all for being a part of this webinar and wish you all a very good day. Bye-bye.